I'm David Boardman, the Dean of the Klein College Media and Communication. I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today for another in our series of Power Hours with alumni of particular achievement in their fields. And we certainly have one of those today. We're honored to have as our guest speaker Tiffany Roberts, 1991 graduate of Klein College, who's an award-winning journalist for Univision. She began her journalism career in her native Nicaragua, covering civil war there for the British news agency Visnews. Her work caught the eye of NBC News, which hired her to report from Latin America as a field producer. And at the age of 24, as a single mom with a 3-year-old daughter in tow, she moved to Philadelphia to study journalism at Temple University. Thanks in part to great mentorship from Professor Betsy Tudelman, Ms. Roberts graduated magna cum laude and was her graduating class's student speaker. After graduation, she moved to Miami to work for the CBS-owned station there before moving back to Nicaragua in 1996 and continuing to report for a variety of news networks from Latin America. In 2006, she joined Univision and its news magazine show Aquí y Ahora. There, she has won award after award, including 4 national Emmys, a Peabody Award, and an Investigative Reporters and Editors Award. In 2018, we were delighted to honor her with a Lou Klein Alumni in the Media Award, and we've really enjoyed a renewed connection with her ever since. Today, we'll hear more about her amazing career and especially how she has contended with challenging ethical situations that she's faced in her reporting. This conversation will be moderated by our outstanding professor, Dr. Erin Coyle, who herself is a nationally renowned expert on journalism law and ethics. So please join me in welcoming Professor Coyle and Tiffany Roberts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Boardman. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very fortunate to have a conversation today with Ms. Roberts. And I'm going to start by asking her some questions, but I also want all of you to feel welcome to put some questions into the chat. And after she and I go through a series of about 5 questions, you're still welcome to put your questions into the chat or to use the raise my hand function if you would like to ask the questions yourself. Well, let's get started by asking Ms. Roberts, how did your experience at Temple University influence where you are today as a 4-time Emmy Award-winning, IRE Award-winning, and Peabody Award-winning journalist?
Thank you, Dr. Coyle. Thank you, Dean Boardman. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love Temple. Temple was a turning point in my life, not my career, my life. It changed my perspective in life. As Dean Boardman said, I was 24. I was late coming into Temple. I was a college dropout. I had started studying engineering. Go figure. And I know just few people that really start in one path and finish it. Usually you figure your way through, and then it takes a couple of years, to understand exactly where you want to go. So I came to Temple with a few credits from engineering school that took care of most of the core curriculum. My English was pretty good because I was raised by American parents. My mom is from New York and my dad is from North Carolina, although I was raised in Nicaragua. So I've been bilingual, and that was a blessing because I was able to go straight to school to what I wanted. I knew exactly what I wanted to study because I'd been working with the networks in Nicaragua. So I just wanted to make it official. I was a journalist in the field, but I didn't have the degree. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I looked through all the schools in Philadelphia area, which is where I wanted to go to school because my dad at the time was living over in Norristown. So Temple was the school because they had the practice. They had the cable channel. They had, hands-on experience, which is what I wanted, and it's what at the time, that's exactly, it fit my needs. But yes, I was young. I was a single mom, and I was so insecure. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. Um, you know, very, very uh, doubtful of everything I was doing. That's why Dr. Betsy, she guided me through so well. And I was new to the college in the United States. I didn't know how it worked with the credit system and the electives, and I was pretty lost. Um, but I what what I did was I literally going into school late. The one advantage it was for me was that I was responsible, and because I was a single mom, I knew I had to get school quickly. I had to finish my studies quickly because I had to get back to work because I had a child to feed. So I was, you know, laser focused on my classes. And I took advantage of school as much as I could. And when I say advantage, for example, um, the first time I had to file taxes in the US, I'm like, what is this? TurboTax didn't exist back then, let me tell you. And, going through, of course, I knew my numbers because I had my background in engineering. I'm very good at, numbers and things, but I had no idea. So I took a class in accounting just to learn how to figure out this, how to figure out how to do my taxes. And I said, well, I'm already paying for school. I need to take an elective. I might as well take accounting. And that's how I learned how to do my taxes because Temple taught me how to do accounting. So that's what I mean by taking advantage of as much as I could. Being a single mom and I used to live in South Philly area. And, I didn't feel quite safe at times. So I remember taking a class in personal defense for women. So, I took full advantage of everything Temple could offer me. And I was, and what happened was I realized that I could be a good student, and I started getting good grades. And I was like, something that I'm not the good grade type. In high school, I was one of the troublemakers, um, but thank God I loved math because I never had to study math. Math, it just comes to me naturally. That's why I had gone to engineering. But at Temple, I had to study. I had to study a lot. I had a lot of writing to do. I learned how to write, how to tell stories. I never written before because engineering doesn't take any writing. And in high school, I just got through, I don't know how. And it was in Spanish. I'd never written in English before. So I learned how to do a lot of storytelling. And Temple just gave me self-esteem. I learned that I could be good, and my teachers were very supportive, and I felt at home because everybody at Temple was like me. We were all, uh, there's no Ivy League. This is it's a real school for people like me that just struggle through life, right? I remember one time it was like a snowstorm and the daycare was closed. And I asked my teacher if I could bring my daughter to class, and he said, sure. And my daughter came to class with me. I mean, where in the world would that be allowed today? But back then, it was just a place that welcomed me. And that to me made the entire difference. And then they asked me to be the commencement speaker. And I'm like, whoa, me? So all of a sudden I realized that I'm good. I'm good at this. And my entire take on my value of myself and how I saw myself through a different lens, the Temple lens, you know. And I always say I came to Temple through like the back door, and I left through the front door. And that Temple turned me into a winner attitude. Because being a winner is not the Emmys, right? Or the no, it's the attitude. The attitude is the first step, the attitude of knowing that you have a voice. As a woman, I have a voice. I learned how to question, uh, and being a journalist is easy to question, right? The whys and and question everything, and it became, and I started learning not being afraid to lead and not being afraid to somebody to show you the way, because that's part of leadership too, is knowing when you don't have all the answers and when to learn how to ask, and surrounding yourself with people that are good at what they do. So I learned how to do other things. I thought I would be a great field producer, and then everything changed, and then I ended up being a line producer. When in the world would I be in a studio line producing? But I learned how to do it. And then and I would direct shows, and I learned how to do, and then I edited and I learned how to edit. Who says reporters can't edit? I learned how to edit. Of course, my engineering skills helped me a lot, because now in the digital world, it was easy for me from the beginning when we turned digital from analog to digital, the difference between, a kilobyte and a megabyte and a gigabyte, So anyway, so that's how Temple changed absolutely my outlook. And it, you know, people in life, when you leave school, it's so overwhelming, and so insecure. But if you're good at what you do in the little things, they always will translate in your work in the big things. You have to be good at everything you do, whether it's, the small things, because, they always talk about paying your dues. That's fine, I'll be good at serving coffee if that's what they want me to do. I'll make the best coffee you've ever had. So that's basically what Temple did for me to win those awards. That's how the only simplest way I can explain it.
Thank you very much. Well, and you and I have spoken previously about the fact that you're very passionate about ethics, and ethics are very important on a daily basis for you and your job. Would you explain for us what the pillars are for what you identify as the five pillars of ethics, and then give us an example
Sure.
of how you apply one of those?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First, you need to understand that I was raised by my father was an army, like a U.S. Army, like he graduated West Point, right? And like he was very strict, loving and strict. I've told you he was from North Carolina, so he was a Southerner, uh, gentleman, but he was very strict. Duty, country, honor was a big deal in our household. So I grew up with right and wrong, and and doing the right thing. So my upbringing had a lot to do with it. Then I go into a field that has a lot of grays in it, and I realize that you can't be square in journalism. There is too many variables, and there's the human element. You come across stories, you come across people, and you always come to a cross path, and you don't know, and there's no right and wrong, like my father taught me. There's, there's ethical decisions, and they all have to do, you know, sometimes we're in a newsroom and there's 3 or 4 of us and we don't share the same decision. One journalist would do something and another colleague would do something else, and I would do a variation of the two. So sometimes there's no real answer to certain, you know, specifics. And with ethics, you have to speak in specific situations, because when you just stay in the theory, then, you know, you just fill your head with a lot of um, definitions and wonderful names like, you know, like accuracy and things like that. So I've learned that each one of these pillars apply to lifetime experiences that you will face at some point uh, in journalism. So I've kind of divided them into 5. There's 4 really, but the 5th one to me is like the icing on the cake. It's like actually, or the backbone, or I mean, whichever way you want. When I'll tell you, you'll understand. But to me, of course, the first one that we all talk about, you know, is truth and accuracy. You know, speaking the truth and being accurate about it. But when I say accuracy, I mean being accurate in every aspect, from spelling the name of the person right. You have to be accurate in everything, from the little details to, of course, you know, the big events of the storytelling, you know, having the date right, you know, the events of what happened, who did what, and, you know, and the journalism I'm doing today is storytelling. And I do think, you know, journalism is all about storytelling. And accuracy has to hold, because if we choose which parts of the story to tell, we're really not being accurate. I mean, you got to be accurate in everything. And then accuracy, then, you know, later down, one of the other pillars is accountability. If you're not accurate, then you've got to, you know, be responsible. You got to be accountable. But that's another of the pillars, is accountability. You need to be owned. You need to own your story from beginning to end. And when I say own it, is that you need to make sure that everything you're saying, or you're reporting, you're writing, you're broadcasting on the radio, you're, you know, whatever you're doing, whether it's some social media post, that it has to hold. It can't be, oh, I read it somewhere, so and so told me. You have to find and make sure that you own that element, because accountability, then you have to own your mistake. And I've made mistakes. And there have been, you know, they've been stupid mistakes. And I've, you know, and like my biggest mistakes recently, you know, with all the experience of it, is because the source I had lied to me. Um, but I can't say that, you know, I have to own the mistake, you know. Then I turn around and I yell at the source, and then I blocked him and I never talked to him again. But the mistake is mine, and I have to own it. So accountability is a big part of it. You have to be able to say, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, and rectify if possible. Um, so those are 2 of them. Then the other one, of course, and this is pretty hard sometimes, is independence. Um, when I say independence, it's at many levels. It can be when you're starting in your career and you go work for a small paper, or you do your own YouTube channel, and you're looking for sponsors and you're trying to make a living. Independence, it's a hard thing to have, because you're always going to need somebody to survive. But you can be independent up as much as, you know, that's why I say there's levels of independence. And because of the economic of the situation, independence is a tricky thing. But having said that, you can try to be as independent as you can and push back. And when I say in my case, when independence, I don't take favors from anybody. I once had a mechanic offer me a free oil change. Now, what are the chances of me coming around and having a conflict of interest with the mechanic? He was just trying to be nice, but I won't take favors from anybody because you never know someday, and then that mechanic is going to call me and said, hey, can you help? There's a story of my aunt. Can you please help me public? No, I don't owe favors to anybody. That's how I stay independent. Actually, Univision has this policy. We can't take gifts more than $10. I can't go to lunch with any public official from any country. I have to pay my own lunch. So there's things always that help you, in that sense. But sometimes something as innocent as, let me get this. I won't let that. In that, I am black or white. I won't take any favors from anybody. So that's how you stay independent. But like I said, there's levels, and you kind of have to navigate and use your good judgment and how to stay independent. The other one, of course, is fairness, which we've heard so much about, and the media is taking so much slack for this fairness thing because, you really have to give equal time to both sides of the story. Just like the coin that has two sides, every story has another side, and your audience has a right, and you have the responsibility to tell them that other side, even though you don't like it, even though you might think it's racist, even though you might think it's wrong. But there's another story, there's another side to that. And you owe it to your audience to know the other side. You always have to put your shoe on where, walk on the shoe of the other person, even though you might think they are wrong. But you need to try to understand why they think like that, why they act like that, or why they say what they say. You need to understand it. By saying, no, they're wrong, and you being the judge of who is right and who's wrong, that's not your job. Your job as a communicator is to just lay it as it is. Try to be as fair as possible. I use Trump as an example. I know people don't want to talk about Trump because, he's gone. But in Univision, right, how many Hispanics voted for Trump? Although, Trump was known as the anti-immigration and all that, but a lot of Hispanics voted for Trump. And every time I covered something related to politics, I kept thinking, a lot of our audience voted for him. Why? So you always have to understand, you don't want to alienate your audience. Your audience is never going to be homogeneous. Homogeneous. I'm not sure if that translates. I think it does. But your audience, whoever reads you, watches you, listens to you, is never going to be the same people. So you need to understand and put yourself in the other shoe, or in the shoe of the other person. You know what I mean? So fairness is tough. It's tougher than you think. You always have to try to give the other side. And if you can't, then you at least know that you tried your best. So fairness. I talked about accountability. That was the fourth one. And the last one, which to me is what makes the difference between a good journalist and an awesome journalist, is humanity. You have to have humanity. You need empathy. You need to feel what your story, every story you tell has to be, you have to be passionate. You have to do it with your heart. If you don't, then it's just a job. Then, then let's just go punch the card from 9 to 5, whatever. But to me, my job is not just a job. To me, journalism is my lifestyle, is who I am. So that's, to me, the difference. So those are the five pillars, I call them. So
thank you very much for explaining your 5 pillars. And I'm just going to state what they are one more time as a reminder. Okay. Accuracy, accountability, independence, fairness, and humanity.
yes, with accuracy comes truth. So it's like truth and accuracy are together. And with fairness comes also impartiality. It's the two things. But yes, those, you got them.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Could you give us an example?
Oh, yes. You asked me about an example about that.
Thank you.
Okay. So I have the most clear example I have was I was doing a story on troubled teens, and there was this school we wanted to profile because they were like the last step before they went to juvie. These were kids in high school that were being caught, whether bring a gun to school, drug dealing, or whatever, But before going to juvie, this was like the last step. The judge would consider and said, okay, I'm going to give you a last chance. And they were sent to this school. And the school was using art as a way of expression. And some of these kids, and they were going to go to, I think it was an art exhibition. And some of these paintings were actually pretty good. So, okay, so let's profile these kids because these beautiful pictures didn't go with the profile of this troubled teen. So we went through all the motions, all the legal motions, right, of getting permission from the parents because they were all underage, under 18. So you need parental permission. And the school was so happy that we were profiling them and everything. So I sit down and I interview this 17-year-old, and he was just adorable. I knew from the moment I sat with him that he was my main character and he was going to drive my story because he was charming. He spoke very well. He had a beautiful smile. And he looked like how could he be, how could he be in this school? So I, as he's telling me the story, he tells me on camera that the reason he's there is because he was caught with like a bag of pot. And, he was selling pot in school, whatever. And then as the story follows, he tells me that he went to court and he pleaded no contest. So of course, when I get back to the newsroom, I'm like, I can't, if I do the story, he's going to incriminate himself, right? He was distributing drugs, drug distribution. It's like, no. And he pleaded no contest. So no. So I said, as soon as this airs, this kid's going to go to jail. We can't air this, right? But then my news director goes, well, he knew what he was doing. If you can't air him, you can't put him in the story, then you have no story. And I said, okay, well, I have no story. And she goes, no, you have to air it. I said, no, I don't. And we went into this huge fight. But I was thinking of, being fair and thinking he really didn't know he was incriminating himself. If he would have had the interview with an attorney next to him, the attorney would have never let him say that. So, I'm like, no. So I refused to put the story on the air, and the story was killed, and it didn't happen. So, but my boss, who was, very hard ass, she was like, no, he admitted it, we put it on. So eventually, because it was my story, thank God I had veto power and it didn't air. So that to me was a very typical ethical question, crossroads where not everybody's going to think the same. It's going to depend on your criteria, and that's when my humanity said, I don't want this kid to go to jail because of me. But my boss said, it's not because of you, it's because of him. So we could debate that, for hours if you want. But that's one of the one of the ones that sticks in my head the most.
Thank you. Well, and sometimes legal standards could lead us to a different conclusion than ethical standards could lead us to. Could you give us an example of a situation in which legal advice would have led you to make a different decision than what you felt was best to do according to ethical principles?
Yes, we always have, although so every time I have a script that has anything to do with allegations, usually 8 times out of 10, my scripts will go through the legal department. And they will suggest me to change a word or do this, which I have no problems with, right? And many times we'll have to make a Zoom call like this when they really want me to change an entire sentence. And you really have to pick your battles with the legal department. But sometimes the entire story is on the line because the legal department wants you to do something. And when for example, okay, so I'll speak through example because it's the best way to explain things. There was a man, this couple was, so this father got a court order to, in very dubious ways, it was later revealed he lied to the court to get a court order for him to have the paternity, to be able to take his son away from his mother. So he hired private investigators, and he basically took the child from the school bus. As they went in and they took the child from the school bus, he took the kid and he flew with his child to France. He had dual citizenship, French and Mexican. The mother, living in Texas, all of a sudden they kidnap her son. And, the investigation ensues. It turns out this man lied to the court in Texas to try to get, the order for his son. But now he was in France with his son, and, he was out of reach for the mother. So the U.S. Marshals or the U.S. Marshals or Interpol had a, so international, whatever. So this man all of a sudden is being, sought by the law because he lied to the court and he kidnapped. So there's kidnapping charges as well. So I find him in France and I talk to him and he's all about, oh no, this is not true. He's the best father in the world. And I said, okay, well, I want us to do an interview. And he said, well, because he was there was a warrant out for his arrest. He was really concerned as to how we would do the interview, whatever. So eventually we agreed that we would meet at a certain point, Of course, our legal department is like, you can't interview a fugitive. You need to let the authorities know where he is. I'm like, no, I'm not going to bring the FBI with me and do an interview and then have him arrested, So that's a typical situation where you are interviewing somebody who is wanted by the law. You know where he is. And apparently, by me knowing where he is, I'm an accomplice because I won't report where he is, whether I become an accomplice. But that's a calculated risk. Am I going to tell them where he is? Or am I going to get the big exclusive interview about this dad and hopefully get to see the child? I was going to go for the exclusive interview. And so that's a typical, head to head that we would have with the legal department, something like that.
Well, and there you were focusing on the humanity of the story, and they were focusing on potential risks for you for going through with the interview and knowing where he was. Were you concerned about the legal risks?
Not really. Not really, because we've been in situations before where we, they would have to prove, I think legally, and I am no attorney, but they would have to prove, I think, malice or intent or something. I'm just doing a story. I'm just doing my job. So for a state attorney to want to charge me and throw me in jail just for me doing my job, I actually think the chances of that happening are 0 to 0. But what can I say? No, not really. I mean, no. I have to be honest with you. I wasn't concerned. I was concerned once where this is before 9/11. I went and to prove how the Social Security office was so lax, the investigative team, and they used me. And I went with a hidden camera and everything to the Social Security office, and I got a fake Social Security number. Now that I was concerned because I knew it was a federal offense, getting a fake Social Security number. So we called the legal department and we said, hey, we're just letting you know that we're going to commit a crime. We didn't tell them what we were doing. Oh boy, they were having a heart attack. We're just letting you know that as part of investigative story, we told the district attorney too. We're going to commit a crime. And then after we do it, we'll let you know. And because they used me and I was with the hidden camera and I was the one that went and got I already had a Social Security and I went and filed for a new one. And I lied on every single form and everything. Oh boy. Now that time I was concerned, but it wasn't just me. I mean, it was a team of people. So I was thinking, well, if I'm in trouble, they're all in trouble. And these were like the creme de la creme of the station. And I was like, well, that time I was a little concerned, I have to say. But in the end, after we got this, we aired the story and I went to the district attorney, I turned everything in and, whatever, and everything was fine. But I laugh about it because I think I was young and stupid at the time. I think I would do that again.
Well, I think that's an example
Yeah.
of a story in which the humanity is so important.
Yeah.
That were you primarily focusing on the need for your audience to learn about this process and to learn about potential problems within the Social Security system?
Yeah, I mean, it was too easy, and we did it in Fort Lauderdale, and we did it in an area where it was like the people that were attending were most elderly. They were very nice. It was in Florida where we get a lot of this was back in the 90s. after Temple, my first job after Temple. We were getting a lot of immigrants here that were applying for, I don't know, it was, the time was different, right? But yeah, I mean, it was an expose and it was a big deal to show this. So yeah, I mean, in the end, you know, don't lose sight of the ball, you know, in the end, it was to expose that this was ridiculous, how easy it was to get a social security number. So yeah, you know, just the end justifies the means. Yeah, in this case, it did. Yeah.
Well, but you also explained to us that you took accountability for it throughout the process, you know, with the legal department where you were working and also with the district attorney where you were working.
Yeah, you have to be responsible, right? I mean, if you're going to do a story, you're going to break the law. You have to be responsible about it, and you got to figure out what are there going to be the consequences. You know, I mean, at some point, uh, we were going to do a story at the border where we're going to enter the United States illegally. So of course the attorneys will say, no, 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 no. But that's an instance where we would do it anyway. And then once, you know, if you get caught, you know, I have my passport, you know, but you still, it's still a crime to enter illegally, and you need to pass this point of entry. So it's a calculated risk you take depending on the value of the story. But when you tell the story, you can't just go around breaking the law. You have to be responsible about it. You know, what are the consequences? Who do I need to tell about this? You know, you can't just break the law and use, you know, your press credential as a shield like Superman. It doesn't work that way. You know, accountability is a big part of it too, of course.
Well, and times are different now. We happen to be in a week in which a journalist is being tried for charges relating to covering protests last summer. So I think a
Yes.
teacher in me that feels that
Yeah.
it's important for us to address.
Well, let me tell you, I've covered many protests, not only the US, but in Latin America. And I've gotten tear gassed and I've gotten shot at with rubber bullets. So when you put yourself out there, you know there's a risk. You can't go to a march and expect to be spared because nobody knows. And when it starts hitting the fan, nobody's looking at your press credential. So you better take care of yourself. You know, if you're going to go to a march and there's going to be bullets, you put a bulletproof vest and you wear all your gear that you need to wear, because you're not immune and you can't expect either one side or the other to understand or to be looking for your press, you know, pass. No, chaos is chaos. And you know, I particularly don't like it when I see journalists claiming that, you know, like, oh, I'm a journalist, don't touch me. Get out of the way. If you don't want to be touched, get out of the way. Because if you're in the middle, there's all these people behind you that are, or in front of you, that they're throwing rocks or that they're, you know, doing whatever it is. And you're in the middle of it, you know, it's going to be very hard for somebody just take you out of the equation and say, you know, just get out of the way if you don't want to get hurt. It's different when you are by yourself in a corner with your cameraman, obviously, and then the cop comes and then they arrest you just because they don't want you there. That's different, you know, but I'm making a difference between, you know, the chaos and when you are targeted as a journalist by authorities because they don't like you there. They don't want you to film them, the abuses that they're committing. That's a different thing. You know, there's to me very clear differences.
Well, and do you feel we have an ethical responsibility to be filming that conduct?
Oh yeah. Oh, we need to film both sides of the conduct. because sometimes, you know, police feel threatened. Um, and sometimes, you know, they're, if you know, the protests were peaceful, right? But then all of a sudden, some people started burning people, burning, people started burning or the businesses, remember, it turned violent at some point. So for some of us that were there, we could tell the difference, you know, okay, so these are the peaceful, but not many people can tell the difference. So if you're covering a protest and it goes violent by a sector, by, let's say, the radicals, you have to cover it. You can't just hide it. Um, that's part of fairness. That's part of impartiality. You can't defend just because you don't agree with what's happening. You're not going to show this other side. You know, you really, 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 it's really hard because we're also from the community to not take sides. But even though in your gut you have a side that you sympathize with, but it doesn't matter. You're not there for that. You're there to really, really report what's happening from both sides. You have to record it. Of course you do. You have to. It's your, if you're there, it's your responsibility, I think.
Thank you. Well, and to me, one of the reasons that you are so inspirational is, you know, you're a good person. Your work is excellent. And you also show us how to overcome challenges. We are in a particularly challenging time for journalists, in which journalists are facing some very public pushback that journalists didn't previously face. Can you tell students a little bit about that and give them some advice for how to handle that pushback?
Well, social media can be definitely a two-sided, a good and a bad thing. Social media for me has been very beneficial because I'm able to use my voice in my privileged position as a network correspondent to denounce abuse, uh, to denounce, you know, uh, human rights abuses, especially in Nicaragua right now. It's going through a tough time. So it's a very powerful tool, but at the same time, I have never ever gotten so many death threats than I get now. I have, I think, 300 people blocked on Twitter. I have canceled, I'm responsible for canceling a few accounts because of their, you know, threats and harassment. On Facebook, uh, I also get a lot of harassment and threats, and I block. Sometimes I will spend an entire afternoon sifting through my comments and people, just nasty stuff. And I have a bar, and it said, you can comment anything you want, but as soon as you offend, you're out. And I block, 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 block. I block so many people. And then if there's a threat, I document it. I take a screenshot of the threat. I go to their profile. If it's Twitter or Facebook, I take a screenshot of their profile. And if the threat is bad, or if it's more than once or whatever, then I will report them. And I'll follow up on the report. And like I said, Twitter is a lot better than Facebook in that sense. And Twitter has, you know, I'm not embarrassed to say that I've canceled, you know, half a dozen Twitter accounts. I know they can open a new one, but you know, they have, you know, whatever. There's, of course, you know, there's the trolls, you know, and those are harder. But you know, if it sometimes it's a constant, somebody that just bullies and harasses, and blocked and reported. So yeah, I've taken I've taken courses. The I think it was the Knight Center, Stanford University, had a course on online harassment and how to deal with it. So I've searched actively online for universities, the Poynter Institute, also in Florida, here in Florida. The there's if you search online, you will find, and they'll have right now. After I took that course, the Stanford University, there's a Facebook group, and I'm part of that Facebook group, and we share things. And there's, and one of the funny things, you realize you're not alone. I mean, there's all these journalists from everywhere, and they go through similar things. I've had pictures of my kids paraded, of my mother on social media with, insinuating things. And it's tough. It's tough, but it's part also about assuming the responsibility and owning. That's part when I say about owning your story. I mean, a lot of the things I do, I cover. I know there's consequences. I have a wonderful family that supports me. My mom, my dad passed, but my mom, she's not afraid, to put it that way. She lives in Nicaragua. When I go to Nicaragua, they follow, they harass, they do this and that. My mom's like, bring them on. It's a family trait that we have. We're tough, my brother's the same, my kids. It's, you protect as much as you can, but at the same time, it's a calculated risk that and that's always a personal decision. That's a calculated risk I take. Not everybody, I can do it, but it's a personal decision. But as far as social media, it can be very scary.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Well, let me open up to invite all of you who are participating to ask questions, either to type them in the chat, or if you would like to ask the question yourself, would you please turn your camera on?
I mean, you guys could ask anything. We have, I've don't be intimidated just because, I'm all those accomplishments that they talk about. They're just one story that was, noticed and, got an award. But, my daily life is very boring. And it's not as glamorous as the Emmys or anything. So just ask anything. I mean, I was one of you. I came from where you came. So don't be, whatever you want to ask, don't worry about it.
Well, I'll ask a question that students
Okay.
often ask. What advice do you have for them? What should they be doing as students to prepare to be professionals?
Well, I think the best way to prepare is to, okay, so here's my advice. Okay. Number one, the most important thing, it's a habit you need to create from now on, is you do your homework. There's nothing worse than a dumb journalist. I'm sorry. Just do your homework. If you're going to work on a story, do your homework. Lazy people are never going to be good professionals. You can't be lazy. You need to do your homework. And what I mean by homework is you do your research as much as you can. Whatever subject you're going to go in, do your research. Go online, figure out who's who. Don't go into a room and don't know the names of the people that you're going to be talking to. So do your homework. And that's a good habit to start in school. Just like when you're going to write a paper, you got to do research on the subject. You treat every story like that. Even if there's little on the subject or you don't have time, just do as much as you can, because the people you talk to will appreciate the fact that you know something about it. So that's I think a valuable piece of advice, is to just do your homework. I think that will help you along the way.
All right, thank you. And we have a good question in the chat. Now, considering that independence is a very important pillar of journalism ethics, how do journalists get connections for difficult stories?
Well, when you say connections, you mean I'm not sure what you mean. You're making it sound like having a connection is like I owe something to somebody. Is that? I'm not sure if I'm reading right the question.
I think
what I mean is that, like, because sometimes you talked about, like, how you had to get the interview with one of the criminals, which would be really hard, but how did you get to that point to find this criminal and, like, actually have that interview?
Oh, because I can be very persuasive. It takes a lot of charm and a lot of what you do. Okay, so it takes a little manipulation, really. Every person who's going to give you an interview, they're not going to give you an interview because they like you. Everybody has an agenda. Everybody, whether because they they want to be on TV, or because they feel like they've been unjustly accused of something, or because they want to be heard. You need always you need to understand what that person's agenda is. It could be just a normal agenda, clear, otherwise you don't. In this case, he was a guy who had like a big ego. He was a guy with a lot of money, and he didn't like it that he was being accused of criminal behavior. If he didn't clear his name, he could never go back to Mexico, where he was originally from, and he was going to be had to be going hiding for the rest of his life. So giving an interview was for him a beginning of clearing his name. So through his attorney, I picked in that, and I used that as a hook. And I said, well, with Univision, we cater to the Hispanic community. I'm really interested in what he has to say. I was sympathetic. I said, I understand he's a father. I understand, he loves his son, but, he's being accused, and I want to understand why, da. So I tapped into his desire to want to tell the story. So that's how I did it. And the independence type, I mean, once, for example, when they tell me, oh, but you can't ask him something. So that's where the independence come in. I said, well, then, the only way we can do this interview is there can't be any conditions. I can't be hostage to, oh, I can't ask about this, or I can't ask us about that, unless it's legal. Like in the case of if I can't ask him where he's living, because legally you'll say, okay, so that I understand, because I don't want to get him in trouble, or I have to respect the fact that there's certain things he wants to keep private. But having said that, the independence has to be as far as you being free to do the story without having anybody, without having any constraints, whether from the bosses or economics. I did a story once on Wendy. It was a story that involved Wendy, the food chain. I got a call from the president of the company, said, tell me again why we're doing the story, because Wendy is pulling the advertising from Univision because of this. And I said, well, because of this and this and this. And he said, oh, okay. I just want to know why we're going to lose money. And that was it. I mean, Univision didn't give in, but then it's Univision, it's a big company. Eventually, the story aired and everything. And I guess Wendy's pulled the commercials for I don't know how long, but company backed you up. So that's what I mean by independence.
But you're also bringing up some important points related to seeking truth and telling both sides of the story. Now, a very big part of this is respecting sources and their desire to have their side of the story told. Is that something that you bring up with them? That you want to make sure that their point of view is getting across?
Yes. Many times the person, when you seek for an interview, you've got to make sure that when that story airs, the person is not blindsided, right? So you have to tell them, hey, I'm also interviewing so and so and so and so. So they'll say, well, then I'm not going to give you the interview. I said, okay, then you don't give me the interview, but you can't dictate what kind of story I'm going to tell. You got to be transparent about the story you're telling. So as soon as, you seek for an interview, you said, okay, this is what I'm looking for. The story is about this. To tell this, I'm going to interview Mr. A and Mr. B and also you. And they need to be, they need to know that, because the worst thing you could do is lie. Really, it's lying. When you tell somebody, when you blindside somebody, you said, well, I just want to get your side of the story. And you're not telling them that the ex-wife is also going to be on the story. You really need to tell them. I did a story once on a it was a band, a musical band, a very, very famous musical band. And they had a falling out with their uncle. And I told them, I said, I'm also going to interview their uncle. And they were furious at me. No. And I said, yes, I have to. I have to interview your uncle. I got to get his version. I didn't have, you have to be transparent, because, and I think at some point they considered not doing the story with us, but they were so interested in having their band profiled on Univision that they said, okay. But they didn't like that I would go and interview their uncle, because their uncle was going to say, another side of them that your audience has a right to know. So yeah, you have to be transparent. That's all about being fair. It's all in the fairness. It's necessary, because as a journalist, all you're going to have as a journalist is your reputation. Journalists were usually not well paid, but, and we're all online. Our work is published. So many times when I talk to somebody who, we're going to do an interview, and I say, well, look me up online and you'll see what kind of journalist I am, and then you can decide if you want to give me the interview. And I've gotten a couple interviews that way, because they look me up and then they know what kind of journalist I am, and they'll see my stories online. It's a very small business and it's very public. So if you're good, everybody will know. And if you're bad, everybody will know. so all our mistakes are very public.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, acknowledging that journalists might sometimes have a personal bias against a story that the journalist is covering. And this question asks, how do you add humanity to stories that you might have a bias against?
Join the club. We all have biases. We all have biases. And sometimes you have to cover stories that are hard to show the other side because it seems it just, it doesn't have any logic to it, right? So you really have to try. You really have to try. I mean, when you it's hard. It's hard to put your personal biases aside, but when you start seeing people as human beings, most time a racist person is probably a product of his own ignorance. A murderer probably was a victim of something. A child abuser was probably, went through hell himself. I mean, it's tough to say, but you have to see them as people. And although it's indefendable, undefendable, well, you can't defend it. But it's important for you as a human being to just see them as people. Sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's impossible. I mean, I've done jail interviews, and how can you see the humanity of a hitman that's killed 20 people, right? But you have to try, because it's a man, it's a story you're telling about that person. So you try to understand, and I'm curious actually, how did you ended up being an assassin? So I try to start like when you were a kid, and I try to see that person as a human being. But if I sit there as a self-righteous person, oh, you're an assassin, a hitman, and I'm never going to be like you, then the interview is never going to be human. You're never going to get to the bottom of it, to the truth. He'll know, the person you're in front of will know if you're judging him or her, because you can tell. If you just get there, if you sit down, if you meet that person and you consciously try to understand who they are and see them as humans, then you'll have a real interview. And then you'll try to understand. I don't hear anything.
Well, that's very important, to be open and to be genuine in those situations. And thank you for acknowledging that it's not always easy. It can be really challenging, but it's essential for good journalism. So you may be working with people, whether they're sources or colleagues, who don't have the same understanding of journalism ethics that you do. Could you give us an example of a time when you've had to explain your thinking about an ethical issue and how you've tried to help someone else understand your thinking about it?
Well, with colleagues, it's there's kind of like a line of respect. You know, I will respect my colleague, although maybe I won't agree with his decision, but it's his story. Your story is like your children. You know, I won't get involved in how you raise your children. However you develop your story, it's really up to you. Um, there's this, you know, underlying unwritten law or underlying understanding that everyone deals in a different way. We don't necessarily have to agree. And I will never criticize a colleague for doing a story in a way that I absolutely disagree with. That's just the way it is. But I will have big arguments with my managers in trying to define, you know, stories. Um, I've had situations where uh, how do I explain? I've had situations where we've interviewed people that are like okay, let's say we can't air the story because let's say I did an interview. I did several interviews in Mexico, right? And then when I came back and I was putting the story together, after the fact, I get a call from a couple of them saying, you know what? Please don't air my interview because they're afraid. So we could just ignore it, right? And just air it. And I've had managers say, well, you know, Univision doesn't air in that part of that country. Aquí ahora, you know, nobody in that area is going to see aquí ahora. But my thing is, if you think your life is in danger because you gave me an interview and you're asking me not to air it, I will not air it because God forbid something happens to you because my story aired. I'm not going to be responsible for that. So that creates a lot of discussions with producers that want to air it, with managers that want to air it, and things like that. That's a call. That's a judgment call. That's an ethical thing. You know, you can call it a judgment call. For me, I won't do it. But that's a clear example.
Well, in that instance, did that mean you didn't have a story? Or were you able to do other reporting for the story?
The story loses a lot of its strength. But hopefully, I had plenty more interviews and I was able to get around it. But those were very good elements we had that would have made the story a lot better. But you know, but it lost strength. And by then you can't go back. You know, there's a lot of security considerations and also you know, budget constraints you have. You know, so in the end it aired, but I took the people out that wanted out.
Thank you.
Because I'm sorry, it's just one more thing because, you know, because the managers were like, oh, we'll just blur them, right? So let's blur them and then we'll see them. And I'm like, no, she says she doesn't want to be on the story. Legally, we're covered because, you know, we get their consent every time we interview them. So legally, we're fine, you know, there's no problem there. But she already said no, she doesn't. Well, let's cover her face. No. She says she doesn't want to be on it. She's scared. She's out. So, you know, so I just wanted to add that.
When Chen.
Does that mean this, like, we're gonna kill the story because of the one interviewee is not don't want to show their interview. So does that mean we're killing the story, or are we using another person's interview to set the story up to like a different direction?
Well, hopefully you'll have several interviews. Um, and this will happen if you go to a destination, like if you travel far for a story, you cover your bases, and you will hopefully get more than one interview. You'll have several interviews to bring your story because many times it's more your story is going to be more dynamic if you have the subject matter you're talking about from different perspectives. So you'll have one, two, three people giving you different opinions or perspectives from that one event. So I had several interviews. Hers was really good, but I could still survive. The story could still survive without her. Actually, with two people, the guy and it was her and her husband, the couple. You could tell they had talked about it probably at night, and the next morning they were like, no. They agreed, I guess. They talked about it, but the story survived, yes. But if you're smart, you'll get several interviews, especially if they're going to send you all the way over, to another country. You're going to take advantage of that and cover your ass.
So I think another way to think about this would be if you have to choose between the story and respecting yourself when you look in the mirror, which one is more important?
That's a good point. That's a good point, Doctor. There's just, you gotta be able to live with your decision. I went to Honduras once to interview the father. I did the story of a young boy who he had come to the United States illegally, and they deported him. And when they deported him, he told in court, of course, that the gangs and the typical Central American story. Well, when he was deported, like a week later, he was killed by the gangs that he had claimed in court that were after him. His attorney in New York was trying to create jurisprudence by giving him posthumous asylum, and that's what caught the attention that's what caught the attention of the story for us. So I did the story. The mom was here in the US. I interviewed the mom. And then I went down to Honduras to interview, the family and to relive and whatever. And the father, who was a taxi driver, he took us around and showed us around, whatever. Well, after the story aired, the father got shot. I felt terrible. Because then he calls us in the hospital. He wasn't killed, but he was shot twice. Oh boy, I felt terrible because I felt so guilty about it, and then the mom called and whatever. And then the attorney calls me and says in New York and says, hey, can we use your story as evidence? Because we're trying to get the dad with a humanitarian visa to come to the US. And I'm like, well, the story is public, it's broadcast. I mean, you could just record it off the air and use it in court. You don't need my permission for that. So they did. They used it. They went to court, and the father now lives here in Florida, and he's, a legal resident. So I was kind of, I'm glad that in the end, the story, but I mean, what if he would have, I keep thinking, what if he would have died? I mean, how do you live with that? I don't want that on, I don't want to live with that. I don't want that responsibility. So I take it very seriously when these countries and these places, when people tell you, I'm afraid, they get shot down there. It's real. So I've lived it. I've seen it. it's easy to sit here in my kitchen in Florida and just, oh, it's not my problem. No, no, that's part of the humanity. You got to live with your stories. They're part of you. And the people, I stay in touch with so many people that I tell their stories because we connect, and telling people stories, you have to connect with them in order to understand their story and be able to convey what it is that they lived through or whatever. So that's part of the humanity of being a good journalist.
Well, thank you for sharing so many stories with us today and being so generous with your time. Let's all thank Ms. Roberts and for a round of applause.
Thank you guys. Thank you for your patience in listening to all my rambling. I got so many stories. You want more? I'm kidding. But thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. If anything, and I always say this, anything in my life, in my experience, God has blessed me with a wonderful family, a wonderful job, a great life, successful journalist. And if there's anything in my life that I could use to inspire, to help, to advise, I mean, that's great. I mean, what's the purpose of living in this life if you can't share it, if you can't do something for, the next generation? So thank you for the opportunity. And go Owls.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We love you.